Good morning. Today's talk is about radiographic film interpretation. Many people have confusion in their minds what RTFI is. People simply look at the films, look at slag, porosity, and they say, well, that is RDFI. I find out what the defects are. I see slag or lack of fusion or lack of penetration or burn through. That's all interpretation. It isn't. Interpretation is much more beyond just looking at the image. First, you have to make sure you accept the film quality in terms of the required sensitivity made available by the penetrometer or the IQI use. We use the word penetrometer or image quality indicator IQI to assess the quality of the radiographic process. So image of a penetrometer with the required number of wires that you can cite according to ASME table T276, whether the penetrometer is source side or film side. Once you cite the required number of wires, you can calculate the sensitivity numerically. Or you can also use the whole type of penetrometer. Depending on the size of the hole visible and the penetrometer designation, you can have the sensitivity established as 1T, 2T, 3, 2, 4T, whatever. Now, once you have acquired the required sensitivity, that means once the sensitivity is demonstrated, it means the radiographic technique is capable of finding out certain defects. So defects would be visible. Next, you must also make sure that radiograph is free of all the artifacts. There should not be any artifact, film mark or scratch in the area of interest. They can be far away. They should be even away from the base metal up to about quarter inch where the heat affected zone lies, where there is likelihood of low hydrogen cracks. So first you assess the film quality to make sure your right ID has been used. Backscatter letter has been used. Backscatter letter is very important to make sure that there is protection from backscatter. Use a lead letter B, half inch height, 1/16 inch thick. And the lighter image of this letter will disqualify. You may have to reshoot or retake the radiograph. Darker image or no image is acceptable. So you may have to take a lot of precautions to avoid the scatter because that will avoid your contrast definition. So once you accept the film quality, then you go for the defects interpretation. The defect interpretation remains the same regardless of the codes. A slag is always slag, porosity is always porosity. But whether or not it is acceptable is decided by particular acceptance criteria, which is called evaluation. For example, B31.8 doesn't allow any lack of fusion, whereas APL104 will allow up to 1.5 inch. So it depends on the code that you use, like section 8 division 1 when you work on pressure vessels, B31.3 process piping when you use for pipelines in chemical plants and refineries, or B31.1 for electrical power generation and power piping, or API 1104 for cross-country pipelines in petroleum and refinery industries, or AWSD 1.1 structural welding code for bridges, etc. So use a particular code. So first part is I interpret and evaluate later. So interpretation means I look at the image and I know from my experience, well, this is slag or this incomplete penetration. If it is right at the center and having sharp straight edge on either side, is incomplete penetration. Lack of fusion may be straight or intermittent line on that. So each of the discontinuities are discussed, how to identify them, because it takes years to become a good interpreter. I remember we used to do interpretation exercises for Saudi Aramco, and we got some 50 level 3s to interpret about 800 films. I remember I was a consultant from Saudi Aramco, and there were so many disagreements. So we got them all together, and then we just explain images by images. So this is all about experience, how you can identify a particular discontinuity, because discontinuities, real life discontinuities are very difficult to identify and they are always masked. You may have two discontinuities, incomplete penetration and lack of vision combined, which could be misleading. So interpretation does require a lot of experience and you must get used to the images. So you have the step interpretation, that leads to evaluation. So evaluation, you will decide whether the job is acceptable or not to a particular code. So evaluation can be different for different codes. So I interpret as slag 1.5 inch. Now many times it is dependent on the diameter. For APL on a 4, for example, there's a cumulative slag, how much is permitted. The sum of the major dimension shall not exceed 6% of the weld. So in one weld length is 8 inch, you calculate 6% of 8, so 0.48. So 0.48 must be cumulative sum of each of the discontinuity. So this is very, very important that you correctly identify the discontinuity, and next step is you evaluate it correctly as per the applicable code or acceptance guide. So very simple. Look at the film, make sure the density is within the limits, which 1.8 to 4 for X-ray and 2 to 4 for gamma for single viewing, and for composite viewing it's different, 1.3 each. So minimum density you need on, you may have composite viewing when you have multiple techniques are used, you put more than one film in a single cassette when the contrast is very high or the subject contrast is very high, like nozzle welds. So to accommodate these you may have to use more than one film, so that satisfactory radiography is obtained within the different range of thickness. I can't have one high contrast film to accommodate large variation in thickness. So I might use 3 or more high contrast film of same speed or different speed. So typically when I use same speed, then I can use composite viewing. The thin part will be viewed superimposed. So minimum density required is 1.3. And for gamma, minimum density required is 2 and maximum 4. Well, maximum 4 is a limit. If your viewer permits, even 5, 6 is also allowed. Because obviously as the density increases, the subject contrast also, and the contrast, radiographic contrast in turn increases. So very simple. And to know interpretation in correct way, if you really want to be a best interpreter, join our RTFI course. It is so well developed, so well designed that it will prepare you for whatever code you want to work on, and will train you for a number of codes, and you will be a practicing interpreter. You can handle any kind of jobs for interpretation. Okay. Do you have any questions on film interpretation? Do contact me. That's it for now. Thank you.